Before moving to Singapore, I thought I had a pretty clear idea of what to expect. But once you are actually here, there are a few things that hit you that no one really talks about. I think that there is a lot more to be considered beyond just getting a job and finding a place to live, opening up a bank account, those kind of things. So if you are thinking about making the move, or you're even just exploring the idea, here are a few things that you do want to be aware of, so you could come in a little bit more prepared and avoid some of those early frustrations that most expats run into. Now, to be completely honest, I think that one thing that doesn't really get talked about enough, or at least something that I didn't fully comprehend before moving, is just how competitive it is to secure a role here. So obviously Singapore has always been very competitive. It's a competitive market here. It's very small. It's fast moving, and you've got people coming in from all over the world. But especially in recent years, it's become a lot more selective. And part of the reason for that is because obviously Singapore has a stronger focus on prioritizing the local workforce. And what that means in practice is that it's not just about applying for a job and being good at the job and just going through the usual process. There is a little bit more going on behind the scenes. So companies are looking at who they are hiring. They are looking at your experience. They're looking at your qualifications, whether what you do is actually needed here. You will also need to demonstrate that you are doing a role that a local Singaporean cannot do. So businesses have a very strict quota on how many foreigners they can hire depending on the size and the marketplace that they operate within. So it's not impossible by any means, but it does mean that you do need to come in with the right expectations and just being aware that you are competing in a fairly tight market, and that getting a work visa isn't always as simple as it might seem on the surface. Okay, knowing that and just approaching it that way just helps you approach the entire process a little bit more realistically, which actually leads me into something else that is very important to understand. And that is that you can't really just wake up one day and decide that you are moving to Singapore, okay, and just figure it out once you are here. Most of the time, you do need to have your job lined up first. You do need to have your work visa sorted as part of that. So by the time that you arrive here in Singapore, everything is already in place. And that is usually either having an employment pass, an EP, or an S pass, SP. And both are tied directly to your employer. So it's a little bit of a sequence first. You get the job first, the company applies for the visa, and then once that's approved, then you can actually make the move. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to that. Some people do come in on short-term or job-seeking arrangements where they are already here and they're looking for a role. But even then, there is usually a time limit attached. And if nothing comes through within that small window that you have, you do need to leave. So in most cases, and honestly, the safer way to approach it is just to have everything already lined up before you even arrive here in Singapore, so that you're not trying to figure everything out under pressure once you are here. But of course, if you are already here and you are job hunting, then you do have to approach it a little bit differently. That means doing your research, doing a little bit of traditional networking, understanding the companies that you are interested in, who is running the teams, who are the executives, who are the decision makers, and then just reaching out to them, setting up coffee chats, meeting people in those companies or industries, even if they're not even hiring right now. Just kind of getting yourself out there and having those conversations really do help. Another thing to be aware of is that Singapore tends to have a very fast moving, performance driven work environment, what people sometimes refer to as hire and fire culture. Now, when people say that Singapore has a hire and fire culture, what they are actually referring to is how quickly things move here. So it's not that companies are reckless and they don't care and they're just letting people go for no reason. But here there is a very, very low tolerance for things not working out. Okay, so if a role no longer makes sense on their end, or maybe performance isn't quite where it needs to be, decisions can get made fairly quickly. And then obviously at the same time, the flip side is also true. Good people get hired very quickly and you can move forward just as fast if things are going well. But one thing, where things feel a little bit different, especially as an expat, is that your job isn't just your job. It is tied to your ability to stay in the country. It's tied to your visa. So there's just a little bit less time to be casual about these kinds of things compared to back home, where you might have a little bit more flexibility and space to take your time and explore your options. Here, you do need to think about stability, okay? How secure your role is and just how everything ties back to your past. Now, another thing to think about if you are considering a move to Singapore is how you negotiate your employment package. Okay, this is very important. It's something that I would take very, very seriously because, as you know, the cost of living here is very real. Singapore has that reputation for being one of the most expensive cities in the world, and you do feel it very quickly once you are on the ground. So it is something that you definitely want to plan for and just factor into your negotiations from the start with the company. Now, when people here negotiate, their first instinct is usually to push for a higher salary, which makes sense. You want to be paid well. You want to feel like you're actually moving forward in your career. But that is just only one piece to it. Okay, it's not the only thing that you want to focus on. You also want to think about allowances because that is what really takes the pressure off the high cost of living here in Singapore, and it just makes things feel a lot more manageable day to day. So a lot of your biggest expenses here are actually very predictable, starting with rent. That's usually the biggest one. So if you can try to negotiate some kind of housing allowance in your package. If you have children, schooling is another very big one to factor in. International schools, as you know, are not small. You are typically looking at around 30,000 to 60,000 Singapore dollars per year per child. So having some level of support there can really make a big difference. Even something like relocation, that is another one. People don't always think about that. But if you are moving to another country, that's not cheap. Okay, that the flight alone can take a very big hit. I just recently booked a one-way from New York to Singapore, and I think it came out to around 2,000 US. And that's literally just getting there. And then, once you land, you've got your temporary accommodation, got your deposits, getting everything set up. So if your employer can cover some of that or even just contribute a little bit, it really does take a lot of that pressure off. Now, the fifth thing that I would actually think about is having a plan for the money that you are earning in Singapore, because, you have to think about it properly. The entire point, right? The entire reason that most people move and work offshore, especially somewhere like Singapore, is for opportunity, right? Opportunity to grow your career, to, grow your income, increase your income, and just actually move forward in life, move forward financially. But that only really works if you are intentional with your time here. So if you're just earning more here, but you're spending more, your lifestyle goes up, you don't really get ahead. So it really helps to just be a little bit more deliberate about that from the very beginning. Just having a very rough sense of where your money is actually going. How are you investing your money, right? How is everything structured while you are here? Fortunately, Singapore does give you some real advantages on that front. It's a relatively low tax environment. There is no capital gains tax here. There is no tax on dividend income. So depending on your unique situation, right, your circumstances, it can be a very efficient place to build wealth. But of course, that only works if everything is set up properly and if you are actually in the position to take advantage of it. So for example, as you can tell by my accent, I am American. I'm from the United States. So unfortunately, it works a little bit differently for me. The US taxes me on my worldwide income, which just basically means that no matter where I live, no matter how long I have been away, even if I do not set foot in the United States for 20 years, I still have to report and I still have to pay tax on every single thing that I earn globally every single year. So I don't get to benefit from Singapore's tax environment in the same way that someone from the UK or Australia might. If you want, I do break this down a little bit more in a different video if you want to understand it properly and see what your options look like as a US citizen. But the short version is that I do not have the same flexibility to structure things as efficiently while I am here. But if that were not the case, if I was not American and if I was in your position, I would be very intentional about not leaving that on the table. I would be thinking about how I'm actually investing my money, how my money is working for me, how everything is structured to just really take advantage of being in a place like Singapore where the tax environment can generally work in your favor. And now my last consideration for you, and I mean this genuinely, is not to burn yourself out. I know it might not feel very relevant for you right now, especially if you're thinking about it, if you're new to Singapore, but it does happen a lot more often than people expect. You come here, things start to move quickly, you get into that routine in your role and you really want to do well, and you naturally fall into that pace. And before you know it, everything starts revolving around work and making money. And slowly that balance just slowly starts to slip away. So just be mindful of that from the start, that Singapore is very small. It's a city state. It's pretty compact. So naturally, after a while, it can start to feel a little bit repetitive if you don't switch things up. But this is also where Singapore actually works in your favor, because Singapore's Changi Airport, as you probably know, is one of the best connected airports in the world. It is super efficient. It's incredibly easy to get through. So getting out and into a completely different country, a completely different environment is actually very easy. You would be surprised that a lot of expats who genuinely enjoy being here, being in Singapore long term, are not just staying in Singapore the entire time. They are using it as a base. They are getting out regularly. They are changing their environments. Whether that is Thailand, that's a very big one. Malaysia, Vietnam, there's so many different places. Me personally, I split a lot of my time in Bali. It's very accessible. It's about a 2.5-hour flight. So it just never really feels like a big trip. I could pretty much decide last minute if, whether I want to make the trip or not, and just get up and go. And just having both that fast pace and that balance between Singapore and then that slower, kind of more relaxed lifestyle in Bali works very, very well for me. It's very sustainable to allow me to keep doing this without burning out. But of course, if that kind of setup doesn't really work for you, it's not really your thing, there are still plenty of other ways to create that balance for yourself. One of the simplest ways is just getting involved in some kind of expat group or social club. There is a lot of social clubs in Singapore, and they're honestly one of the best ways to meet people and just start feeling a little bit more settled. And you don't even have to fully commit straight away. A lot of these clubs actually offer day passes, so you can go in, spend the day there, get a feel for the environment, meet a few people here and there, and just see if that is something that you would actually enjoy. And even outside of that, just in your day-to-day, it's actually very easy to step away, just to step away for a bit. You've got places like East Coast Park where you can cycle, you can go for a run, just be outside, be by the water. And then you also got spots like McRitchie Reservoir Park where you can go for a nice little walk or a nice hike. And then beyond that, obviously there is greenery all over the place. You're never really that far from having a bit of space to clear your head and reset. So those are a few things that I wish I had taken the time to understand before moving here. And if you are at that stage where you are considering the move yourself, or even just you're already in the process and you're just trying to piece things together, do not feel like you need to have everything figured out up front. It's very, very normal just to kind of feel new, and it's everything to feel a little bit overwhelming at the beginning. But if you stay patient, right, if you kind of do your research, take the time to understand how things actually work here, and you make a few thoughtful decisions early on, it does come together faster than you expect, okay? And if you would like a little bit more clarity on how to actually do that, I will be going deeper into different parts of life in Singapore, what to actually watch out for, how to set things up properly, how to make it all work in your favor. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.